6:30, I'll call the meeting to order. Jeff? No.
Anyway, welcome to the sunny city of Painesville after rain yesterday. I've heard several cases of rain that more than we got here, but we don't need it for plenty of weather out here. I was thinking if this was a township meeting, there would probably be no weather. They'd all be doing what they can. Anyway, welcome. Thanks for showing up. Jennifer, our administrative assistant, is taking care of the meals up there. Our new media specialist, Lynn, there is helping out. We are going to record this, and we're going to put it on. We're going to try YouTube, for and maybe spread the word. Maybe missed it because Gary Carlson is here and has such a tremendous presentation that we don't want anybody to miss it. And while I have everybody's attention, I would just like to remind you all of the League of Minnesota Cities Conference coming up June 18th through the 20th. And we'll get to hear more of Gary and their staff's report. I'm sure they've got a very interesting presentation that they'll put on there. And if you're a member of the Small Cities Association, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, Mayors Association, they'll be meeting throughout those 3 days also. So you can pop in on some of those. So anyway, again, welcome, and back over to our chair.
Thanks, Jeff. Everybody get a chance to read the minutes, or so entertain a motion on approval of the minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Santa.
Any other discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Treasurer's report.
Happy meeting. I don't have anything to hand out because I didn't want to waste the paper. There hasn't been much going on since we last met in January. If anybody does want a copy, I can see if I'm smart enough to turn on the copy machine and make one in the other room there. Since the first of the year, we've only had 2 expenses. One was to Rena Weber for her secretarial fees of $35 and $172.33 to Freeport for the meal. In January, we don't have any dues that have come in because we can blame Rena. She's not here for not sending them out before she left office. And Renee did, I think, email them out to everybody, and there are copies back there too. So grab one for your city when you leave, turn it in to your whoever pays the bills, and hopefully we'll get the checkbook back up again. Current balance as of my last checked online at the bank before I came here, $694.44. And I don't have any actual bills, but I suspect we'll get one from Renee for her, the treasurer's, or the secretary, I wish there was treasurer one. The secretary fees of $35. And traditionally the city pays some of the meal costs. We'll work that out with here, and then we'll submit the rest of that bill to the league for that when we get that figured out. That's my report.
Questions on treasurer's report? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to accept it.
Make a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Committee reports. I do not see Lloyd here. Is anybody else?
Lloyd could, at the last minute, Lloyd got called up to the farm, but he said there was no feedlot action since the last meeting, so nothing to report.
Thank you. Read the 7W. See Randy or Jim? I guess then we're to our guest speaker, Gary Carlson. Turn over to you, Gary. It's all yours.
You want me to come up here? I guess the camera's over here. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day, and thank you for getting me out of St. Paul. I want to thank Jeff also because he serves on the board of directors for the League of Minnesota Cities, so he'll be back down on Thursday to meet with us and our board of directors and talk about the upcoming annual conference and other events that are going on at the League of Cities. So the session concluded on Friday evening. You're probably well aware that they got done a whopping 3 days early. Not all that early by any major standard, but generally they go right up until the very last day of the legislative session, and so it was nice. My wife appreciated the fact that I had some time to do yard work this weekend, and I actually did a little bit of painting as well with the nice weather over the weekend. But the session started on February 25th, and you may remember that at the start of this session we had, for the first time in many years, actually a projected budget surplus. When the February forecast came out right after the session began, the estimates were that the state had a forecasted surplus of just over $1.2 billion. And if you flash back to just a few years ago, 2008, 2009, we were battling deficits in the range of about $5 to $6 billion. So this was the first legislative session in quite a while where we actually had a projected surplus, and all of the state's commitments to repay school districts, to repay the airport fund, all of those things were taken care of before the session began. So some people would say that they overshot when they raised taxes last year, and now we had a surplus. However you want to look at it, the legislature decided after the session was over to take about a little under half of that surplus and use it for tax relief. They put $550 million of the surplus into tax relief in terms of reduced business taxes, reduced property taxes, some reduced income taxes for conforming with the federal tax code. They put $150 million into the state rainy day fund. So that was one thing that the legislature had been talking about for many, many years. We have a $553 million rainy day fund before this year. It's been at that level for at least the last 10 to 15 years. So even though the budget has grown quite a bit, the state's rainy day fund, the actual set-aside money that is there in case we have a budget deficit, has not been added to for many, many years. And the legislature wanted to at least begin the process of increasing that reserve. So now instead of $653 million of reserve, we're going to have about $800 million of reserve, still below what many financial experts suggest a state ought to have in a reserve fund, but it's moving in the right direction, and I think they plan to add more to the reserve so that they can avoid future budget cuts if we have another economic downturn. They also put, of the $1.2 million surplus, about $303 million into new spending, and I'll talk more about some of the spending that they did this year, and $200 million in addition to the $300 million, another $200 million of the reserve or the excess that they had, that they actually put into one-time capital projects. Some of it went into roads, some of it went into housing, but it's just extra money they decided to use for one-time projects and not put it into the base budget and require that taxes be raised into the future. So that's kind of a snapshot of what they did in a very, very broad sense. They passed 169 chapters of law, and a chapter of law is really nothing more than a bill that is approved by the House and Senate and sent to the governor. Many of those bills are big, what we call omnibus bills, that are compilations of many smaller bills. But there's quite a few just standalone bills that are involved in that 169 chapters sent to the governor. As of today, let's see, he signed 4 more, so I think he has 28 bills that he has yet to sign or veto. And he'll have until May 31st to take final action on the bills that were sent to him in the last 3 days of the legislative session. So a fair amount of legislative activity, nothing unusual. 169 chapters of law is actually nothing out of the ordinary in terms of volume of legislation going through the process. So that's really kind of it. I'll talk a little bit more here about some of the details of the budget outcomes in just a second, but I did want to actually just end my introduction by saying that the last night of the session, 14 House members actually announced that they were retiring before the next legislative session, before the elections this fall. 14 members, that's about 10% of the legislature we know right now will be brand new when they reconvene next January 6th. That's, again, not an extraordinary number of retirements, but there's some very senior members that have decided to hang it up. I think the commitment of the legislative process is very trying for individuals. It takes a ton of time, and many of them just said they just couldn't afford to do it anymore. So 14 members, about 10% are going to be brand new, and we know when the elections occur this fall, we'll have quite a few more people that are brand new elected that may defeat an incumbent legislator. So. And also, the governor and the constitutional offices are all up for election this fall as well. So the Senate is not up for election, but the House and constitutional officers are, and you'll hear more about that as we approach the fall. And again, as I said, this all begins again on January 6th of 2015. So with that, let me just talk about a few of the things that did happen this year. And just today, the governor signed the second omnibus tax bill. The first tax bill was passed way back in March, and that was really the tax relief, tax conformity bill that the legislature wanted to pass. It included about $450 million of tax cuts. But they had plans all along to pass a second tax bill, and the second tax bill has more of the meat of what affects our cities and counties on a daily basis. One of the things that happened last year in 2013 is that we were finally successful after 20 years in securing an exemption on the purchases that cities and counties make, an exemption from the sales tax. And we thought that was a great victory until the Department of Revenue started trying to figure out what the exemption meant, and we ended up with a lot of rules and regulations and things that weren't exempt. And did any of you attend the Department of Revenue training sessions that occurred around the state last year? Well, we had some rulings from the department that basically were concluding that even things like playground equipment on a public park were not exempt for various reasons. And we just did not agree with the Department of Revenue on some of their interpretations. So before the session began this year, one of the things we wanted to do was clarify this law. Last year it said it added cities and counties to school districts and townships in terms of who is exempt from paying the sales tax. Well, the Department of Revenue said, well, we understand cities and counties, but your joint powers entities are not a city or not a county, even if they are comprised entirely of city and county government entities, and therefore your joint powers entities are not exempt. We kind of scratched our heads on that one as well. But we did introduce legislation early in the session this year with Senator Ann Rest, one of the tax chairs, as our Senate author, and Representative Freiberg, who lives in Golden Valley, as our House author, to do two things. One would be to clarify that joint powers entities that are comprised of cities, counties, schools, townships, watershed districts, these joint powers entities that we have formed to deliver services more efficiently and effectively are going to be exempt. Unfortunately, the exemption doesn't take effect until January 1st of 2016, so not for a year and a half. We tried to fight and get that moved up to July 1 of this year. Unfortunately, the budget target of the tax committee wasn't sufficient to extend that exemption immediately, but it's at least in law, and if the joint powers entities, your HRAs, EDAs, and port authorities can hold on, by January 1st of 2016, their purchases will be exempt from the sales tax. The other thing that we had to clarify, though, was, as I indicated, some of the playground equipment and other purchases by cities were deemed to not be tax exempt because there's this little clause in the tax law that says if the service or the good is generally provided by a private business, it is not exempt from the sales tax. And that is meant to apply to the obvious things like golf courses. You have public golf courses, you have private golf courses. And the legislature, when they enacted the law, wanted to make sure that they were both treated for tax purposes in the same way. So the law says golf courses, municipal or private, are paying their sales tax on their purchases. That was easy to understand, but when it got into this gray area where they started to determine that parks were not exempt, we had to clarify the law. So what ultimately happened this year is that the law now is a very strict list of carve-outs from the exemption that says golf courses, liquor stores, gas and electric utilities, waste hauling, recycling services, landfill services, marinas, campgrounds, cafes and laundromats. I think that's the full list. Those things, that specific list is not exempt from the sales tax. Do any of you have a laundromat or a cafe that is owned by the city? I don't know why that's in the law. Apparently, back in 2011, when they extended the sales tax to townships, somehow laundromats and cafes, there must have been some entity around the state, some city or township that had a cafe or a laundromat. But anyway, the list is made narrow. So now your park and rec purchases, your swimming pool purchases, those should all be exempt beginning on July 1st of this year. So we think we've dramatically simplified the law. Another thing that was confusing, the Department of Revenue said if Painesville held a wedding in this room here, that you would have to, the city would have to basically allocate how much electricity is being used during the wedding reception, and then remit a sales tax payment to the state of Minnesota, because banquet facilities were facilities that are generally provided by private business, and you would have to pay sales tax on all of the associated inputs to this facility. That is all gone now. It doesn't say banquet facilities in the law would be subject to tax, so again, if it's not a golf course, a gas or electric utility, a liquor store, the purchases ought to be exempt moving forward. So we think that'll be a dramatic simplification of the sales tax law. By the way, if anybody has a question, just chime in as we kind of go through some of this.
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, on the exemption, is that retroactive to where the bill went into effect, or when does that take effect?
Unfortunately, it's not effective until July 1 of this year. So this clarification on competitive goods and services is effective July 1 of this year. The joint powers exemption is not effective until January 1 of 2016. So that's a year and a half down the road. That was a very expensive thing to do. It cost, I think it was over $25 million for the state to eliminate the sales tax on joint powers entities. So beginning July 1 of this year, it should be dramatically simpler to deal with the sales tax for things like the lights in a community center or a swimming pool purchase or a park purchase. So July 1, 2014 for that. Okay. Yeah.
What do they estimate the total revenue loss will be a year? They must have an idea.
When the exemption was first enacted last year, the estimate was the state would lose $129 million in the first full year of the sales tax exemption for all cities and for all counties. What drove us nuts with the Department of Revenue was when they started implementing the law, they kept saying that more and more stuff was not exempt. And they never changed that revenue estimate from $129 million. And we felt like we had to go back in this year and actually ask for money again that we thought we had asked for last year when we got the exemption. But that's the way the legislative process works, unfortunately. And so the total exemption cost per year under this new revised version, this adds about 25 to 30 million more dollars of exemption costs to what was already the 129 million in the base estimate. So moving forward, the state is going to forego revenue from cities and counties, but it ought to make your lives easier, hopefully, and save some local budgetary dollars. Wayne.
I'm not sure if this is a reasonable question, but if there's a joint powers agreement and an entity makes a purchase on June 30th of 2015, but makes an arrangement with the vendor not to pay them until January of 16, is that how would that work?
The way the sales tax law works, and I'm not a sales tax expert, I deal more on property taxes, but I've had that question, that basic question as many times. The sales tax liability is due when you receive the good or service that's taxable. So if you order it before January 1st, 2016, but you take delivery of it after that date, it would be exempt. But if you take delivery of it before that date, technically you would be liable for the sales tax on whatever that purchase is. This wasn't an ideal thing. We really wanted to accelerate that for joint powers and EDAs and HRAs and port authorities, but again, And we were competing with a lot of other people that wanted money out of the tax bill, and a lot of tax relief proposals. And the best we could do in the end was to at least have it enacted into law. They have to take it away from us now if they want to take that money back. So not perfect, but maybe a step forward. Let me just explain two things that did not happen on the sales tax issue really quickly. One is that when the exemption went into place, a number of cities were calling me up and saying, you know, we're going to buy a snowplow, should we wait? Well, the snowplows and road construction vehicles pay not the general sales tax, but the motor vehicle sales tax. And the exemption only applies to the general sales tax. So this year we introduced a bill that would have exempted city and county snowplows and road construction vehicles from the motor vehicle sales tax. The bill made it actually into the House tax bill and went to conference committee. Unfortunately, it didn't come out of conference committee, but it would have exempted our snowplows. It would have exempted our road construction vehicles, not normal public works vehicles, but vehicles used to actually maintain and fix the roads. We're going to bring that back next year. I talked to the authors about reintroducing that bill, and we're going to get it up and through the process next year. It only costs the state, I think, a couple $1 million a year, believe it or not. But that did not become law. The other thing that you may have seen and heard about, if any of you are doing a capital or a construction project, the process by which you can secure the sales tax exemption for bricks and mortar and asphalt and the materials used in your project is extremely cumbersome. You have to bid labor separate from the materials, and you have to basically make your contractor a purchasing agent for the city or the county. We wanted to simplify that law, and unfortunately that cost another, I think it was estimated to be $16 to $17 million to make it easier to not tax the bricks and mortar. What surprised us on this issue was that school districts have been exempt forever. They've never been subject to the sales tax since the sales tax was enacted in 1967. And when we went to talk to the school districts how they navigated this cumbersome process, a lot of the school district building officials said, we don't even bother, we just pay the sales tax. It's too cumbersome. So we're going to go to the Department of Revenue this summer and see if we can convince the department to rewrite the rules to make it easier. When you're building a fire hall or a jail, well, the jails are exempt now, so that doesn't count. They are specifically exempt. But if you're building a public works garage or a city hall or a community center, right now it's a very cumbersome process to get the sales tax exemption on the materials. If you want to know more about that, I can give you some information from our website that discusses how to structure your contracts, but we'll try to fix that again next year. Very briefly, also in the tax bill, the legislature did appropriate an additional, is there a question?
We were just discussing the jail. No sales tax on the jail.
Well, my county brethren tell me that jails are specifically exempt from paying sales tax on the materials. Now, that's what they told me. Our cities don't have the jails to deal with, so.
We've got about a $5 million project going, but it's something that we want to follow up on with our staff to see what
You might want to talk to the Association of Counties as well, because they deal with that specific exception more than I would. So, the tax bill also ended up giving some more money to cities and counties. The LGA appropriation was increased by $7.8 million for the distribution of aids payable in 2015 and beyond. And I have a couple of printouts if you want to look at, try to find your city on these printouts here that. I only brought a couple, I apologize. But that was kind of unexpected. The House actually had a little bit more money in their bill, but the Senate had no additional LGA money in their tax bill, and in the end they gave us an additional $7.8 million to help cover the cost of increasing city budgets, the impact of the last winter on public infrastructure and so forth. So a little bit of money, not a lot. The county's got there's two things that happened to county program aid. One is that there were a handful of counties that were losing aid for 2015, and they're going to be grandfathered at their 2014 level, or is it 2014, yeah, I think that's how it works. That will cost a little bit of money, but they also decided to put $10 million into aquatic invasive species remediation. And counties will get a distribution of additional CPA based on, I think it's the number of boat launches in your county and a couple of other factors. The money has to be used, though, for invasive species prevention. So it's not no strings attached money. It has to be used specifically for trying to prevent the spread of invasive species. One thing you should know is that the city and counties, when you have to certify your preliminary levy, it has been September 15th every year for many, many years. This year, the legislature decided to delay the levy certification date to September 30th for cities and counties. That 2-week delay was really at the request of some of the metro cities that have to deal with a separate property tax program called fiscal disparities. And the data that they need to understand the impact on their city budget is not available, readily available by September 15th. So they gave us 2 extra weeks. So now the city and county preliminary levies don't have to be certified until September 30th. So just a couple of extra weeks, but it gives you a little bit more time. Maybe you don't have to do more of your planning in August. You get a little more time in September to get those preliminary budgets done. Anybody have a TIF district? They made some changes in the TIF laws. One that would possibly affect some of you. Because of the Great Recession, many TIF districts that were first created in the mid-2000s were struggling to get all of the development activities completed in the 5-year time frame that is required under state law. They did extend the 5-year time frame for districts that were created, and I have to remember the exact dates, certified between April 20th of 2009 and June 30th of 2012. And they will have an additional 5 years for any districts that were certified in that time frame to complete development activity within the district. Again, this was a residual from the Great Recession. Many cities had requested some extensions, so they decided to do it generally. So any district is eligible if it was created after April 20th of 2009 and before June 30th of 2012. So that in a nutshell is the tax bill. There's a lot of other stuff in there. There's tax relief for individual homeowners, for individual renters. There's additional tax relief for farmers in the tax bill. We'll get into the details of that. We will summarize in greater detail what is in the tax bill in the bulletin that we produce this next week. So pay attention to that on our website. Any other questions on the tax bill? The bonding bill, there were actually 2 bonding bills. As I indicated, there was one where the state actually issues bonds. That was about $850 million of bonds for projects across the state. And there was a second bill that was $200 million of cash. So this was probably the biggest capital projects package that we've seen in the state of Minnesota ever. Almost $1.1 billion of capital projects. Many cities and counties had individual projects in there. There are some monies that are available generally for competitive grant and other programs. They put $12 million into the federal Clean Water and Drinking Water Revolving Match Program. That should be available for cities. The wastewater infrastructure grants received $18 million of additional resources. The Reinvest in Minnesota Reserve Program, $6 million. There is some money for local roads, local government road wetland replacement program, got $2 million. The flood hazard mitigation grants received $4.5 million, and some money in the metro area, specifically inflow and infiltration grant money for dealing with sewer and storm sewer issues. Southwestern Minnesota, you may have heard a little bit about the Lewis and Clark water expansion to Laverne and Worthington. That got $22 million of state money that they hope is ultimately reimbursed by delayed federal money. Congress was supposed to appropriate some money. to help Worthington and Laverne and southwestern Minnesota create this interstate pipeline that was going to pipe water from over in the Missouri River Basin. The state decided to put the money up because Worthington is having a terrible problem down there with availability of water right now. Despite all the rain we've had, Worthington and southwest Minnesota have not been faring very well. And they are in a rather severe drought, but they also have a depleted groundwater table, so it's more than just the surface water. So the state did put $22 million into that program. Trying to think of what else was major in the bill. There's the local bridge improvement program received $12 million of bonding funding and additional $20 million of cash funding. That's in the local bridge improvement program. That's a competitive program. And the local road program received $24 million in bonding proceeds and an additional $30 million in cash in that second $200 million bill. So there is some money in the bonding bill. There was not a transportation package enacted this year, so this is kind of stopgap one-time money. It's not the permanent fix for transportation. Senator Bach told me toward the end of the session we really do need to figure out a better way to finance our roads because the revenues into the Highway User Fund are not keeping up with the demands, especially after this winter. I know a lot of cities and a lot of counties are really looking at depleted budgets for just simply snow plowing, much less fixing all the potholes and the damage done by this last winter. They also put some money into housing. The housing infrastructure bond appropriation was increased by $80 million. That's a big chunk of money for affordable housing. That's one of the bigger housing packages the state has put together in many, many years. So the bonding bill got signed today by the governor. It actually passed rather quickly in the legislature because there was all eyes on that bill because they needed, for the bonding bill, 3/5 majority to pass it. And they needed 9 Republicans to vote for the bill. In the end, I think they had almost 24 Republicans vote for the bonding bill on the House side. So it became a fairly quick affair once an agreement was reached between the majority, the minority parties, and the governor. They passed those bills very quickly, and they are now law as of today. So any questions about the bonding bills? Big projects. Then very quickly, a couple of other items. Just for budgetary purposes, be aware that the omnibus pension bill was passed, and I don't believe it was signed today by the governor, but it will have impacts on city and county budgets. The general plan, the plan that is the pension plan for many of our general city employees, our non-public safety city employees, has been running a deficit, and the legislature was required to increase the contributions into that plan. So beginning on January 1st of 2015, the employee contributions will rise by 0.25% of salary, 1/4% of salary, and the employer contribution on their behalf will rise by an equal amount, 0.25% of salary. That leaves the total general plan contribution for employees at 6.5%, the total employer contribution at 7.5%, and again, that affects the first paycheck after January 1st of this year. So it doesn't matter if the payday is on January 1, that entire paycheck, even though it was all earned prior to January 1, is subject to those higher employer-employee contribution rates. Just a couple of other quick things in the pension bill. One is many of our cities have been telling us that we have employees that are forced to go into the PERA plan because the law that governs whether you're in or out says if you earn more than $425 in any one month, then you're automatically, for their ever after, included in the pension plan. Representative O'Driscoll was trying to help us raise that 425 threshold. I think it hadn't been raised since the mid-1980s, and obviously $425 is not much money anymore. And we actually have a lot of employees that don't want to go into the plan because they never plan on staying in public service for very long. We were unsuccessful in actually raising the 425, but it now is a $5,100 per year threshold. So if an employee just simply goes over the 425 in any one month, under the old law, they would automatically, for their ever after, be in the pension plan. Now they have to earn more than $5,100 in a year, which is really nothing more than 425 times 12 months. But it should avoid having somebody who works a couple of extra shifts at the public swimming pool as a lifeguard, eclipsing that and automatically being in the plan when they never really want to be in the plan. Representative O'Driscoll wants to raise that number. The employee unions were very strong in opposing this. We thought we weren't even going to get this $5,100 annualization in the law. But again, this should help at least have those people that would only occasionally eclipse 425 from automatically being in the plan. Question?
A couple of years ago, there was talk of doing away with PRA and going to like a 401k system for public employees. Whatever happened to that?
The pensions plans, all three of the state pension plans did a study of moving toward a defined contribution system or a 401k type system. It has languished in the legislature. There has not been a strong desire to pursue that. Last year, when the Republicans were in control, we thought there might be a move to maybe put the new employees into a defined contribution plan. The defined contribution obviously would have less, less financial planning problems than do these defined benefit systems where you have to figure out how long people are going to live, how much they're going to earn, how much they need to contribute. But it just never came to fruition. There was never a proposal to actually do that. There still are discussions about trying to move the new employees into either a defined contribution system or into some sort of a hybrid where a portion goes into a smaller defined benefit and a portion goes into a defined contribution system so as to lessen the volatility that can be created by those defined benefit plans. I would expect there'll be more discussion of that in the upcoming legislative session, but I honestly can't tell you precisely why it languished. Even when the Republicans were in control of the legislature, there was it never came into a omnibus bill. So, any other questions about pensions? Then quickly, one of the issues that came to us last year in our policy committee process was a frustration on behalf of local building inspectors that the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Department of Labor and Industry was not delegating inspection responsibilities to our local building inspectors. Several cities in greater Minnesota and actually a couple in the metro area, when they had a turnover in their chief building inspector, the Department of Labor and Industry was saying that person is not eligible to inspect some of these state licensed facilities. And many of our cities were getting very frustrated because it felt as if the Department of Labor and Industry was really trying to usurp our local power and our local building inspector responsibilities. So we sat down with the Department of Labor and Industry back in November, December, and kind of reached an agreement and passed a law that now will make a more formal process by which they will enter into delegation agreements with our local building inspectors. We think it'll be more transparent, more obvious, and we think it will result in more delegation agreements so your building inspectors will be able to conduct these building inspections rather than having the state inspectors have to come in and do it. I should just say as a side note, this bill, because it deals with building inspections, got tied up because you may have seen some of the discussion about the building or the residential sprinkler requirements in the new building code. And on several occasions, this bill was amended with a sprinkler prohibition amendment. And so the bill had to actually be added, our bill language, which had nothing to do with building or with residential sprinklers, had to be added to another bill to ultimately get it to the governor's desk without the sprinkler requirement, because he said he was going to veto anything that prohibited the sprinkler requirement. So anyway, this did become law, and I think it has yet to be signed by the governor. It's on his desk right now, and I don't think there's any issue that he will sign the bill ultimately. Have any of your police departments had a driver's license lookup issue where your officers may have looked up a driver's license record of somebody and then been sued? Well, this issue has really percolated at the state capitol, and it's been a really tough issue at the Capitol because there's a lot of data privacy experts that want to preserve the non-public nature of the driver's license records. There was a bill passed, and we're going to get more information on what this means for your city operations, but suffice it to say that there's going to be requirements that you have security in place to make sure that only people that are supposed to be looking at records are looking at those records when they need to look at those records for official purposes. So we'll get you more information about that. That bill was moving through the process very quickly, and every one of those driver's license lookup lawsuits had pushed this bill further and further along. It's going to be one that has some ramifications for how you govern your data at City Hall. So we'll get more information on that to you. And then just a couple of other things I wanted to mention. There was a bill passed that was a compilation of a whole bunch of different bill proposals that was ultimately called the Women's Economic Security Act. And it's going to have ramifications for both private and public employers across the state. And I'm honestly not the expert in this, but the bill does a number of things. It guarantees up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for employees, and I think that only covers employers that have more than 21 employees, but I don't have that in my notes here that I put together quickly that that's the case. But I think it's only if you have more than 21 employees, but don't quote me on that right yet. We'll have it in our law summary. But that could be a problem for a small city that doesn't have a lot of full-time employees and somebody goes out on leave for 12 weeks. That could create a problem with staffing levels. The other things that the bill does is it requires that you authorize or allow people to use sick leave for an expanded list of relatives, including grandparents and, what is it here? I got to read the law again. I'm sorry, mother-in-law, father-in-law, grandchild are added to the list of employee relatives for whom sick leave can be used. They actually tried to make it even broader than that initially, but some of the private employers pushed back, and they ended up with just mother-in-law, father-in-law, and grandchild. You have to make accommodations for pregnant women in the workplace, including additional work breaks, restroom breaks, more frequent access to drinking water and food, limits on physical movement such as heavy lifting and so forth. We'll get you more information on that. Dwayne.
Yeah. When you talk about sick leave, do the same things apply if you have PTO, paid time off?
You know, I don't think it does, but I'm not an HR expert. I think the PTO, because you're combining and just giving people a lump sum to use for vacation or personal leave, I don't think this covers the PTO. But again, unfortunately, I'm not our HR expert that worked on this, so you might want to ask your HR people to look at that law and figure it out. This is, I don't remember what chapter, I apologize. But if they just search for the Women's Economic Security Act, they'll find all of these provisions. One other thing that it does also require is that you make reasonable effort to provide a room other than a bathroom for a woman who is breastfeeding or expressing. And so that's going to be a challenge for some of the smaller city halls to make sure that if you have an employee that is nursing, that they have the ability to have a private room for that specific purpose. So that bill was signed by the governor on the 11th of May, so that is already law. You may want to pay close attention. We'll have more information on the HR aspects of that law, but it also creates the possibility of some additional litigation because it does add into the Human Rights Act a challenge for some of these claims. So we'll have to be watching that very carefully. But this bill moved very quickly through the legislative process. There are a couple of things that didn't happen, just very briefly. Many of the city councils and county boards adopted resolutions supporting allowing cities and counties to use their official website as an alternative to traditional newspaper publication. It wasn't a mandate that we use our websites, but it was an option. That bill got heard in the Senate. It never got heard in the House. The House chair of the local government committee did not like the bill and did not allow it to come up for a hearing. So we didn't even have the option to get that bill to the governor this year. But Representative Mike Nelson from Brooklyn Park said that he opposed it because his mother doesn't have a computer. She likes to read the newspaper. But he did say to us, well, at some point in the future, she won't be reading the newspaper any longer, and we can maybe think about the web alternative. So I think he actually said it kind of that way. But anyway, that bill did not become law. Many of you have supported the idea of a street improvement district authority for cities as an alternative to fund your local roads. That got sidetracked in the Senate Tax Committee. The chair of the Senate Tax Committee did not necessarily like the idea, and it never was added back to the Senate tax bill in the end. There's a lot of other things that happened, but maybe I should just stop and ask for questions.
I've got one here.
Yeah.
We had a discussion this morning in our office. Can you explain the difference between a pocket veto? If he doesn't sign something, on the news this morning, they said it's a pocket veto and it's automatically vetoed. Some people said they used to believe that it was automatic. What's the difference and what is the rule?
That's a really good question. Well, here we get into trivia. The pocket veto only exists in the second year of a biennium, and only exists for bills that are passed in the last 3 days of the legislative session. So, except for the last 3 days, any bill passed before the last 3 days, if the governor takes no action on that bill, it becomes law without his signature. But if a bill is passed in the last 3 days and the governor doesn't take action on it, it becomes a pocket veto. So it only affects the last 3 days of the biennium. Now, that's, as I understand the way the Constitution has been interpreted, is that that only applies to the last 3 days of up to the first Monday after the third Saturday of May. which means that the only bills that this would cover this year would be the bills that were passed on Friday, which I think there was about 20-some days passed. That would be subject to the pocket veto. So before the last 3 days, the governor either has to sign it, veto it, or it becomes law without his signature. In the last 3 days, either he signs it or it's a pocket veto. It's just those two options. So it's one of the peculiarities of the way the Minnesota Constitution. Does that make sense? Did I explain it? So there is a pocket veto, but only in certain instances. So, yes.
Minimum wage, how's that going to affect cities? That be just like business?
Yeah.
I mean, are already overpriced bartenders are going to get more overpriced? Is that basically what's going to come down to?
Well, the minimum wage is, it's bifurcated. There's a lower minimum wage for smaller businesses, and I think by extrapolation for smaller cities, and I'm blanking on what they set the business activity at. It was, maybe it's $500,000 a year. I don't have it right off the top of my head. But by extrapolation, I think that the Department of Labor and Industry has determined that it's just your general fund city budget that would determine whether you're subject to the lower or the higher minimum wage standards. But I'm not an HR expert. I apologize. And I don't remember what the precise numbers are. That was a bill passed much earlier in the session. I've been kind of focused on the last 3 or 4 days here.
But is there information will be coming from the league?
Yes, yes. And there may actually be stuff on our website. I think our HR department has already posted some research memos. If you can't find it, give me a call at the office tomorrow, and I'll make sure that we get a link to it for you that explains everything that you need to know. Yes.
What happened this session with the broadband?
Oh,
Stuff.
thank you for reminding me. The supplemental budget bill was passed and signed by the governor, and within the supplemental budget bill that was signed today, there was an appropriation for $20 million, which was a little lower than what most people wanted, but $20 million for competitive grant money for broadband initiatives that could be applied for by local government or by industry. So that money is out there. It's supposed to be a starter to help try to implement broadband more broadly in Minnesota, high-speed internet more broadly. But you'll get more information on that. Again, it was just signed today, but DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, I think will be administering those grants, and they'll be coming out with rules as to how to apply for it. So $20 million. I think we were hoping for 25, but in the end, they dropped $20 million into that program. Any other questions? Yes.
You had said there's like that local road fund is 24 million that's for bonding. I believe you mentioned. Is that gonna be like a first come, first served again? Give it early?
Ann Finn is our lobbyist on transportation, and when she told me about this today, she said MnDOT already has a whole lineup of projects that people have applied for, but cities should go ahead if you have projects is to try to get into the queue. I think there's been a backlog in that program, so this should help at least alleviate the backlog, but it's probably not going to cover every road need by a long shot. But Ann was telling me that cities should go ahead and if you have a project that would be eligible for those grant monies, to go ahead and apply and get into the queue so that the next time they put more money in or they free up some resources that you'll be in line for grants. And Ann Finn is our transportation expert, so. Any other questions? Well, we'll be doing a more complete update at the League's legislative conference, and you'll have all my other smart people, or all my smart people there. I'm just one of the people that works on issues at the Capitol. I focus mostly on tax and pension issues. That's why I talk a lot about those. But Ann Finn, our transportation and public safety expert, will be there, and Craig Johnson, our water infrastructure land use person, will be there. Patrick Hines, our general counsel, will be there. So good people to talk to. And always feel free to call us at the League office if you have questions. That's what we really love to do. I mean, as much as I like the legislative process, it's fun to actually work and help you troubleshoot issues that you have at City Hall. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
End of the updates. You want to do them, or? SC has not yet, so I guess we'll do it. You want to start? Oh,
Sure, why not? We do have all our council here tonight. They're sitting in the back row just like church. Dave and Jean and Kay and Jean. And a couple things to update here. We have on staff now our own building inspector who's learning the ropes here, and we hope to be able to, if another city needs a building official or whatever, to contract out with them in the future. Once we teach them right, then we can turn loose. I did mention our new media specialist, Julian over there, who's now back running the camera. Thank you. A couple things going on. We've got a 2014 street project that has started out on the west end of town. We were supposed to meet tonight out at our shelter at Veterans Park, which the county has participated and built a couple years ago, but we are redoing the parking lot out there, so it would have been kind of messy. The county should be starting in mid-June, I think, on the Business 23, or the MnDOT county project there that turned back. That I think will be starting fairly soon here. Get that taken care of. Our splash pad will be in its second year out at Gazebo Park right down here. And if I didn't know it was going to be this nice, we could have had it going for you too. And we plan on building a park shelter at our community park, which is just off Highway 55. We have community gardens out there. We've got a BMX track. We've got a couple wiffle ball courts and some things like that. We've just added on to that some acreage onto that park there, and we'll be building a permanent picnic shelter. We're still dealing with NPCA with our Midtown gas station and the benzene issues that are getting into contaminating some of our wells here. And we're working with a developer on a couple lots out at Opportunity Park, which is just off on the Highway 23 bypass in Veterans Park. Did I miss any?
Baseball stadium.
The baseball stadium.
Baseball stadium. Yeah, we got some federal money that we're wishing we wouldn't have gotten because that's been a nightmare. As far as, and it's on school property, it's a storm shelter that we're going to put under a new stand for the baseball field. at the high school, because there's federal funds involved through FEMA. It's on school property. The state has to be involved with the building inspection. It's a concrete building. There's nothing that can burn, but it has to be sprinkled.
More restrooms because it might be used both the shelter and.
Yeah, it's been pretty much a nightmare. We hope to have it done by June 1st, maybe next year.
Is that going to be covered and then usable for amateur games?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was one of the baseball association has been a spearhead behind this, and the city participated with them and the school district, of course, to to show some collaboration to get the FEMA funds. But it's been a can of worms, and once it's done and in place, it should be nice. But the main intent is for a storm shelter out on the area by the high school out there for the community and the schools.
Wastewater and the water treatment plants.
Almost done with those. So a backwash reclamation addition to our water treatment facility, and in conjunction with the bypass, so we upgraded our main lift station.
Cold Spring, we got a little bit of construction going on this year in Cold Spring, out in our business park. There's a gentleman that's going to build a 60-unit storage unit building. We have an investment group that's going to build a 50-unit apartment building, one of 2 units. We're going to build one 50-unit this year, and hopefully have it open for occupancy in April of next year. And if that goes over good, they'll break ground for the second 50 next year. County is redoing, resurfacing County Road 50, and the city, we're putting the infrastructure in the ground at the same time. That's starting soon as school lets out and finished before school starts again. So it's a project that's going to have to happen pretty fast. The motel is in the process of expanding. They're putting on 8 more rooms and a convention center meeting area in the front of that. The credit union is broke ground, and they're building their new bank building in the Granite Landing building there where Teal's and the Granite City Bank is in. What else am I missing here? That, and then the big thing that really happens is, and because I'm a firefighter, I'm going to talk the fire department a little bit. Firefest, it's our 6th annual Firefest concert. It's a country concert. This year it's Saturday, July 26th. I don't know how many of you are Jake Owen fans, but Jake Owen is our headliner. And he only requests $300,000 to play, so he's a good headliner though. He'll be a good band. So, and then we have 4 other bands that play prior to him. So starts at 4, ends at 1. Good time. So get a chance, come out and listen to some country music. Did I miss anything, Dan?
I don't think so. I think you guys covered.
Where do we go? Richmond.
Richmond, we did, I think you said you guys had anything last year, Kennedy, they said January, you guys did it? We finished up the water and sewer project, of course, and then we got a few minor repairs and reworks that we have to get done. We had 2 businesses, of course, the Dollar General store was complete, and that opened up in January, December, somewhere since that time. We have a new boutique downtown as well, Chuck and Darlene Deal. Started a place right down from downtown area. And then Glacier Trail, they just started working again, and they want to have that section from the bridge over to the Prairie Trail. They were working on it today, so looks like we could possibly have that thing done here real soon, so we'll be able to link quite a few cities together here. So, but I know they said originally they would have it done by July 1st, but they were out there working on it today, so I can see that being done here in the next week or two. That's it.
I came late, I had a conference call with the VA. There's not a lot going on in St. Augusta. We got 4 new home permits this year, and we're getting more nibbles every day. We managed to get a $90,000 grant for safe routes to school, which we're going to put in the app from County Road 75 over to County Road 7. and then we're gonna have the flashing speed limit signs in front of the school. You've probably all been reading the Times. District 742 is looking at land in St. Augusta. There's a piece of property, 185 acres. Remember, they're only looking. Nothing is definite, so don't believe everything you read in the Times.
That's the most accurate paper in the world.
Dave on PSI, our big building right on the freeway, they vacated. They closed the doors on February 14th. On March 1st, we already had a purchase agreement signed for that building by Mid-Soda, who's on the south side. They're expanding, so we got pretty lucky there. Joseph's is still in the process of being owned by the bank at this time. Hopefully they're going to find somebody to move into there. We have a 16-unit apartment that's scheduled to come in, play this fall, and we've got 5 building permits for new homes. So we're plugging along.
Moving forward, we have great news. We are finally getting natural gas in town this year. We've been working on it since 1993. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen like we want it to happen, but it'll happen. I was trying to get on the state bonding bill, but even our own legislator, Ms. Fishbuck and Mr. Driscoll, snubbed us. So much for that, but we're still going to make it happen. It'll cost us a little bit. It's going to happen.
Rockville, not much going on right now. Still working on with a cheese plant, possibly coming to work with Coles. Problem there is that we got to get them on the loading with the sewer capacity be there, so they're still interested in coming there. Downtown, but at Grand Edge Cafe, there, a Mexican person had a little, he did tax when I was a little boutique, and a baby boutique or stuff there, so people want to look for small items. I've never been in, but that's going on. And just our normal road maintenance, trying to get up after winter, fixing potholes and that. So, and I think the county park, the county's going to start working, trying to clean up their trees, make it a little more. I went down to storm so people can use that. And there's a few people coming over there now. Hopefully we can get a figure our business too at the same time. Whenever just projects are starting to be worked out in the following year.
Federally, the when I seen the paper that the U.S. Attorney was in town last week. The new U.S. Attorney, and I was on his hiring committee, so that helps us to get a little extra contact with him, and he's going to be helping us out on a couple things on federal prosecutions, which is good to know. Statewide, medical marijuana was a big thing for the County Attorneys Association. The governor held tight that we're not going to grow it and we're not going to smoke it, but there was no objection to having it for medicine to begin with. All that furor was over people who wanted to smoke it and grow it. And once they got over that this governor was not going to sign that, then this was not that big a deal. So this is what law enforcement prosecutors have been hoping for from the beginning. Keep it to real medicine and then we're fine. But let's not pretend that those other things were really medicine. And then locally, those of you who have been out to your city councils, we're relooking at our diversion program. In some of the very low-level offenses that go to court, court's designed for big deals. And when things go to court that aren't, in the grand scheme of things, that big a deal, it's just not very effective. And we finally figured out that part of our screening program for the first-time offenders literally tells us that if you, on your first offense, you can't even complete my diversion program, you might be one of those $1 million kids. And so we really started looking at who are we getting in the first time, and what are we doing the first time, and what can we do to change that. So those of you who do your prosecutions, I've already talked to you guys about how that might look differently. But we took it to law enforcement with some of the charts and graphs and data, and we're going to be looking at that over the summer so that when school starts again, we can have that in place.
County commissioners.
Excuse me. Well, I guess first of all, I'd like to say that both Mark Lomachenko and Steve Notch had other commitments this evening, one with the library board, one with the Sac River Watershed District. Otherwise, they'd be here. Well, we had a couple of things that happened recently. We passed a golf cart ordinance, and golf carts, we had to educate ourselves. I didn't realize that golf carts had headlights and signal lights and all that sort of thing. So if you're on a county road and you're in the city limits and the city allows them to use a golf cart, we've done jail remodeling that we've talked about a number of times here. That's well on their way, should be finished by the end of the year. We did a road tour last week, Friday. The county board went throughout the county with and checked roads out. We had a road information information meeting on the 5-year road plan last Tuesday. Some of you may have been there. The county program that Gary talked about before that really was a problem for AMC. Not the $10 million that was given to the counties, but it had to be used for aquatic invasive species. So in the past, the county program was for human service types of things. Now it's, now we get this money, but it has to be used for that. So it's kind of going around the circle to make some folks happy. I think the intent is fine, but the vehicle was kind of questionable. What else is my?
I think those are the major things. The golf cart ordinance was big for some cities.
Yeah, that was something that St. Joe was pushing on.
No, I just want to ask any questions.
There may be some other things going on. I don't know if anybody has questions, we can try to answer them.
Dwayne, on the golf cart, you said on county roads, but does the city have to pass an ordinance for that too?
The city has to allow it.
So your ordinance doesn't supersede ours?
No. The only time ours takes place is if the city has an ordinance, then they can also say, it could be on the county roads that are 30 miles an hour or less within the city limits.
And I think it's important to note that there's a 1-year sunset on it. So we're going to see how it works, and if it works fine, we may extend it. If it doesn't work fine, we'll have to take another look at it.
Now, they're not allowed, if I remember right from the newspaper, you're not major collectors and materials.
Has to be 30 miles an hour.
That's more or less.
Yeah.
But, so like, St. Augustus County Road 7, it might be 30 miles an hour or less, but County Road 7 is minor arterial.
It's in the city limits.
Yeah, do you have a city ordinance though?
Yeah, see, then it's not allowed.
You gotta say first.
But, no, I was just, if we did put in an ordinance, if the county says it can't be on county road and on arterial road, then they still couldn't go on county road 7. I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you want detail, I think Jody Tyker, engineer, or the county attorney's office can do it. But generally, I mean, if it's on a county road in the city limits, and the city council allows it, then it's fine for the next year.
Yeah. City leads.
Just one I had.
Huh? Is there anything maybe?
No, I fell asleep during the day.
The fees for that.
Second.
There were 2 fees that were going to be charged for that, one from the city and one from the county. They're trying to get it so they only have to pay it. Yeah. So from the county, and I know the city sets their own.
That's being worked on as well.
So it's a fee for what?
For a license for the golf carts on the road.
Get a permit for the golf cart.
Well, you got to require a permit?
The cities have them, so then.
No, we don't. We've had loud golf carts for years, we won't require it.
Does the county require?
On the county roads.
So, as long as it goes on the county road 82 goes to Rockville, you should have then need a fee or permit. Although I can, maybe I can diverse around that road.
So if I didn't catch this, you're saying if we've had an ordinance for golf carts, now if they drive on the county road, they have to get a permit from the county?
I think before this, it wasn't legal for them to drive on the county roads.
Yeah.
We're not talking about legal or illegal. We're talking about,
That's probably a question.
they have to get a permit from the county? I didn't realize
Right,
that.
on the county, if they use a golf cart on a county road,
Legal.
legally, they have to go
What's the permit for? I mean, where's the money going? What's it for?
Well, for the administrative fees, I mean, and it's
Yeah,
certainly.
but if you didn't give a permit, you didn't have to have administrative fees.
Pardon me?
If there was no permit, just make it legal to drive on it. Why have a permit? You wouldn't be able to fees.
As you know.
Because to make
I
sure that
see
they
the
have,
difference.
so make sure that they have the turn signals and they have all the stuff that we're supposed to have, so that when they get killed driving it on the county road, they don't sue the county. I'm your city attorney too.
I think we have, who's gonna inspect this golf cart then? I mean,
When they come in, well, it's gonna be no different than when you go to get your tabs, they don't come out and.
yeah, okay. So it's just, okay. But I still think here, the city, if we want to let them drive, or just like bicycle, we'll Chelsea permit also, right? Okay.
Other cities have license for bicycles.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
So,
and dogs and.
Yeah.
It helps pay for the services that you receive by having a road there. You put a,
Sheriff
if you
is
got
not
a boat
patrolling
with a
the
trailer, you
trail.
got license on that. Chill down.
the 10 hour fee goes to the county. Okay. As long as I know where it goes.
Did I miss any entities? I have a motion and a second to adjourn then. All in favor?
One more side.
See you later.